Welcome to the Qasim Rashid Show, a civil rights lawyer here to expose all forms of injustice with a sprinkling of dad jokes in between. Here's your host, Qasim Rashid.
Good morning and peace be upon you this beautiful day wherever you're tuning in from. My name is Qasim Rashid and this is the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. Wow, we've got a show for you today coming at you kind of still in not disbelief, because I think I saw it coming, but just outrage at where we are as a country with Donald Trump re-entering the White House as the 47th president. And so I want to go over just what the hell happened, what went wrong. I'm seeing all sorts of takes online. Some are great, some are terrible. And I need to break down exactly what went wrong, because if we don't grapple with this and truly understand why a convicted felon and rapist got reelected so easily, I mean, it was not a close election. If we don't grapple with why he got reelected so easily, it's going to happen again. Obviously, he can't run for a third term, but at this point, who the hell knows? The guy's a fascist. The guy said he's going to be a dictator on day one. Project 2025 is a fascist manifesto. I don't know what's going to happen in 2028. I have no idea. What I do know is over the last few months, I and many others have been sounding the alarm bell that this is not going to go well for us if we don't activate and organize effectively in ways that actually reach people where they need to be reached. Get off the ivory tower, get off the high horse, or come down from the ivory tower, get off the high horse, and actually do something that's going to meet the needs of the people beyond rhetoric. And that hasn't been done. And look, I know there's going to be people yelling that, well, they passed the CHIPS Act and the infrastructure bill and they brought down insulin prices and they passed a climate energy bill. All great things, all absolutely great things. And I give credit where due. I give them their flowers. These are all excellent things that moved the ball forward. But the results speak for themselves. The results speak for themselves. And so you can talk all you want about what was done, but if people don't know about it, and if people on the front lines are still hurting, and the data shows that they are, 67% increase in poverty under the Biden administration, if you're not acknowledging that, then people are going to vote against you. Simple as that, or they're going to stay home. And I think that's one of the distinctions I want to point out as we go down and break down the data here, that it wasn't necessarily that people voted against Harris. There's a very few people who flipped from Harris to Trump. The data shows it was about 4%. Meanwhile, 5% flipped from Trump back to Harris. So that really wasn't it. That was a wash. What ended up happening is that people just stayed home. Trump is ending up with about the same number of votes that he had in 2020. Harris is about 12 million fewer than Biden. You can talk all you want about how Trump supporters are racist, and many of them are absolutely racist. I called out his Nazi rally at Madison Square Garden for what it was. But them being racist doesn't explain why our left-leaning voters stayed home. There's no connection. There's no correspondence between the two. And if you're dismissing it as, well, there's just a bunch of racists, then you can do that. And then we'll lose in 26 and in 28 and beyond. This is a fact. So let me start first with just a short reflection, and then we'll get into the data, because I was thinking about this and I wanted to write this the day after the election, the full analysis, but I'm like, let me just take some time and do some research and make sure I get it right. But I wanted to get something out there, and I was reminded of an interview that James Baldwin gave late in his life. And the interviewer asks him, are you still in despair about the world? And I felt like this was a perfect conversation to think about, because I think a lot of folks woke up on November 6th, the day after the election. A lot of folks who had voted for Harris, or who had wanted Harris to win, they woke up feeling a sense of despair. And maybe you're feeling a sense of despair right now. And so James Baldwin, the late, great James Baldwin, was asked this question, and he responded. He said, I have never been in despair about the world. I've been enraged by it. I don't think I'm in despair. I can't afford despair. I can't tell my nephew, my niece, you can't tell the children there's no hope. And I thought that was powerful because oftentimes we conflate anger with despair. Oftentimes we forget that the despair that we might face is not something that we can go to children in their innocence, in their purity, and tell them there's no hope. Why would you tell a child that? Why would you crush their future with that? Especially what we know about history and how many young people have literally led revolutions to overcome injustice. We can't wallow in our despair. And so I share this as a short reminder to not lose hope, that it's okay to take time to reflect. It's okay to think over your thoughts before responding or responding at all. Many people are hurting. Many are confused. Many are angry, rightfully so. There's no rush to respond here. And there's no need to be hopeless. And I say this both to people who are hurting and to those looking to point fingers. Already in the last, 4 or 5 days since the election, I received, I don't know how many nasty notes, not from MAGAs, but from Democrats, from people on the left telling me to F off or enjoy the camps, or I hope you like being deported, or filthy pig. One person, actually multiple people told me, I hope they flatten Palestine now. Nonsense, absurd nonsense. Now, I don't take these personally. I've learned to let it bounce off like Kevlar, but I do take these seriously as a reflection of the state of mind. Look, if we're going to get through this, we need to better understand what caused this, what got us here in the first place. And so in addition to reflecting, I want you to reflect on what actions you can take. One ask I'll make is to support the people doing the work. If you're listening to this on Substack, subscribe. If you're listening to this on Urban View, subscribe. Invest those resources. Taylor Lorenz is an excellent journalist, and she put out an amazing article. Why can't the left build its own Joe Rogan? Why can't we build that narrative? Why can't we have those conversations? So have that support. Invest your resources. Hit that subscribe button and be meaningfully engaged. That's how we build trust. Look, my commitment is to reciprocate that trust with consistent and thoughtful and fact-based analyses and insights on these key human rights issues and civil rights issues that impact all of us. And I'm going to go to break here in a second, but when I come back, I'm going to give a full analysis of what happened. And it's going to upset some people. But my responsibility as a human rights lawyer is not to speak soothing falsehoods, but it's to speak hard truths. It's to speak truth to power. The Democratic Party has lost 2 winnable presidential elections in the last 3 contests, resulting in devastating consequences for the American people. Basic human rights are being stripped away. Women are dying because they can't get basic abortion access. Children are dying because infant mortality is spiking, it's catapulting. This is the direct result of the Democratic Party failing to win these elections and letting a fascist party take control. Oh, to be sure, I blame the fascist party for passing these policies. And I blame the Democratic Party for fumbling 2 very winnable presidential elections in the last 3 contests. This moment calls for self-reflection. It calls for self-analysis. The fate of our republic, indeed, literally world peace, is literally at stake. We cannot afford continued failures like this. We can't. And so how do we fix this? What steps do we need to take? When we come back from break, I'm going to delve into that. And I want you to just give me time to make the argument, because I'm going to make some pretty bold statements that's going to upset some people. But I promise you, there's one thing you know about me, if you've been listening to this show for a while, if you've been reading my research, is that I always bring the receipts. And I promise you, I have the receipts to back up the points that I'm making. And they're going to make you feel uncomfortable if you've not heard them before. But I know a lot of you folks are going to be like, yep, that's what I've been saying. That's what I've been trying to tell people. And I love that. And I respect that. I respect the hell out of you for that. And I ask each of you to stay more invested and more engaged. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. When we come back from break, I'm going to talk about the 3 big reasons why we lost. And the number 1 reason is going to be Joe Biden's arrogance. Yeah, I said it. Joe Biden's arrogance is why Kamala Harris is not the next president of the United States. When we come back from break, I'll break down what that means. Welcome back. We're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. If you're listening, hit that subscribe button because I need your support. I welcome your support. We're talking about the 2024 election debacle for Democrats and just what the hell went wrong. And I promise this is going to be a hard conversation, but a fact-based, receipt-based conversation. And I said the three things that went fatally wrong, the number one thing that went wrong was Joe Biden's arrogance. And that he is the reason why Kamala Harris is not going to be the next president of the United States. And before I get to that, let me give some quick overview, some high-level points that we need to address. One, let's be clear. Black women showed up and Black men showed up. I know Black men are getting some hate because they didn't show up as much as women, but the number one demographic to show up for Harris was Black women at 92% voting for Harris. The number two demographic in the entire country that voted for Harris was Black men at 78%. So I get it. We're upset about the 22% Black men who voted Trump. Fine. But nonetheless, 78% of Black men showed up for Harris, and we need to give credit where due. Those two demographics, Black women and Black men, showed up big time. White women and white men showed up for Trump, hardcore. White women voted 52% for Trump, white men 59% for Trump. No surprise there. That's been the status quo. We get it. Racism, misogyny, it's not a deal breaker for these folks. In a lot of cases, it's kind of the feature. Latinos shifted hard right for Trump. Latino men went from 36% for Trump in 2020 to 54% in 2024. Latino women shifted from 30% in 2020 to 37% in 2024. Now, to be sure, the overall Latino community still voted for Harris. So you saw more than half of the Latino community, about 58% voting for Harris, and that's credit where due. So the summary is that Black people showed up for Harris, white people showed up for Trump, and while Latinos shifted right to Trump, the overall majority of Latinos still voted for Harris. Let's also acknowledge the continued failures of legacy media, from the LA Times and the Washington Post refusing to endorse any candidate, to CBS and CNN refusing to fact check the presidential candidates, to the New York Times whitewashing Trump's clear cognitive decline. I mean, I think it was called sane washing. Some of the sane washing they did was just reprehensible. I think, when he just danced for 40 minutes, waving back and forth, the New York Times headline was something to the effect of, Trump opts not to take questions and instead enjoys the music. Like, what? Like, if you saw a man randomly floating back and forth for 40 minutes without saying anything, you would probably call a medical professional, a mental health professional, to have this person looked at. New York Times calls it enjoying music. Anyway, the media failures will be written about for decades because they have been abject failures. I mean, you guys probably recall that when Biden was still in the race, his age was a constant focus, constant point of debate. The moment he resigned, media completely forgot that Trump is only a few years younger than Biden, that he's exhibiting as bad or worse cognitive decline, and that he may not exactly know where he is. Completely forgot about it. Third, let's talk about racism and misogyny. It absolutely played a damaging role in the election. Legacy media gobbled up Trump's attempts to question Harris's identity. Is she Black? Is she Indian? Is she neither? Is she both? Nonsensical questions, all distracting from issues that actually matter, like her actual policies. Disinformation about Haitian migrants, about eating cats and dogs, created more fear and hate of Black people and of immigrants as well. Misogyny and racism continue to dominate the political discourse. There's no doubt about this. And we need to acknowledge that. And Harris faced the onslaught of both. And this undoubtedly cost her votes in ways that she just simply could not mitigate or address because it was out of her control. And then finally, Let's talk about third-party candidates very briefly. Jill Stein, Cornel West, Claudia De La Cruz, RFK, they all played their roles in trying to break up the duopoly with negligible success. I mean, without any real success at all. The election results demonstrate that Stein did not cost Harris any electoral votes whatsoever. And there's almost no evidence that demonstrates that her involvement played any meaningful role in Trump's win whatsoever. I mean, she did not pull a Ralph Nader 2000 against Gore. And so anyone blaming Stein for Harris's loss is just making up facts. There's nothing there to validate and substantiate that. There's plenty of criticisms of Stein. That is not one of them. She didn't actually cost Harris the election. Now, all four of these things, whether we're talking about the failure of legacy media, racism and misogyny, the shift rightward for Latinos, third-party candidates like Stein, they all impacted the election. None of them individually or collectively prevented Harris's victory, though Latino shifting right certainly didn't help. And this is why I say it's critical that the Democratic Party not blame these individual things, but reflect on the matters that are within their control, matters that they fumbled that directly resulted in a Harris loss and in a Trump reelection to the White House. Now, if Democrats have any hope of preventing a third presidential loss in 2028, if they have any hope of being successful in 2026, they need to take a cold, hard look at themselves. Early on November 6th, I tweeted this. I tweeted, so to recap, Democrats lost the White House, the US Senate, the Electoral College, 8 of 10 governor's races, the popular presidential vote, and are on the cusp of losing the House of Representatives. If anyone thinks that this is because 51% of the country is xenophobic and not because Democrats ignored their own base, then it explains why Democrats lost so badly. And the tweet went semi-viral, and it attracted significant negative attention from fellow Democrats, again, taunting me about being deported and calling me a filthy pig and telling me to F off and accusing me of supporting Trump. And in doing so, they basically proved my point, that we're not spending enough time on introspection and more time lashing out. And I'm not going to get into a big diatribe of defending myself, but I will say very quickly, if you followed my work, you'd be hard-pressed to find someone who's been more critical of Trump and antagonistic to his reelection than me. I've been very clear that he's a fascist from day one. I've held fundraisers, donated thousands of dollars, knocked doors, literally traveled to Michigan and Georgia, even ran for office myself against Trump's fascism. So don't come at me with your complaints about, do you support Trump? I despise the man. I also recognize that we need to be critical of our own party. If not willing to be critical of our own party, then I'm sorry, you don't belong to a political party, you belong to a cult. So here are the 3 critical errors I believe that led to the November 5th debacle in the 2024 election and what the Democratic Party must do to prevent such a debacle going forward. Number 1, I'm going to spend the most time on this part of it because I think it's the most critical. Joe Biden's arrogance, and broadly speaking, the Democratic Party leadership's arrogance. Let's be blunt about this. I put the primary blame for the election 2024 debacle on Joe Biden. And I will be as bold as to say that he set up Kamala Harris and the Democratic Party for failure. Here's why. Back in 2019, Joe Biden ran for president on the promise of being a bridge president to a younger generation, suggesting that he would only serve one term and then pass the torch. At numerous rallies, he loudly declared, look, I view myself as a bridge, not as anything else. I view myself as a transition candidate. I mean, at the time, he was, 74 years old, 78 years old, and already the oldest candidate in American history. Now he's 82. We thought, okay, at 82, he'll retire, I'll be done. It'll give us time to secure our republic, get a Democrat back in the White House, protect the House and Senate, and then have a robust primary. Well, it was with that explicit expectation that a monsoon of young voters helped him cross the finish line with the victory, earning 7 million more votes than Donald Trump. But, and here's a problem, when it became clear that Biden had no intention of stepping down, those who even suggested that he followed through on his campaign promise were demonized, dismissed, decried, and denounced. Even as poll after poll showed that Biden's support among young people who helped him win in 2020 was all but gone, those who believed Biden should withdraw were shouted down. I was looking at Adam Frisch's. Adam Frisch ran for Congress in Colorado. I think he won. I got to check the results actually, but nonetheless, pretty popular candidate. On July 2nd, he put out a call saying, "Biden, you need to step down." And I took a snapshot of his responses. First response, dipshit. Second response, well, you're damn sure not getting my money now, blocked. Third response, farewell, Adam. You're a guy who cuts and runs on your friends. Say who you are, a bit scared, desperate, a bit of cowardice. Don't hit me up for money ever again. Next response, will you even bother to read these replies? Isn't it your job to listen to the people? Next response, bye. Next response, you're such a disappointment. Next response, you're wrong. And because of your doubt, your hesitation, I'm blocking you. This is what Adam Frisch got just for saying, hey, Joe, you should step down. The polling looks terrible. We're not going to win with you. There's countless examples of this. But by backtracking on his campaign promise to serve only one term and then stepping down last minute, Joe Biden did something fatal to the Democratic Party. He denied a robust primary. Now you're probably wondering, well, so what? What's the big deal? Harris had overwhelming support from Democrats. And the big deal is that having a primary or not is quite literally the difference between winning and losing. And the data on this is undeniable. And we have the last 4 presidential elections to exemplify this. In 2008, despite being the favorite, Hillary Clinton, and having that favorite, the Democratic Party held a robust 10-candidate primary. 10 candidates. And if you can name all 10, I'll be deeply impressed, but you probably can't. But if there's any indication, 1 woman, 1 black guy, 8 white men. 10-candidate primary back in 2008. And in that open field, Americans got to see a dynamic young candidate from Illinois make his case. The end result, President Obama made history as the nation's first black major party nominee for president, made history as the nation's first black president, and made history by winning an astounding 9.5 million more votes than McCain, decimating him 365 to 173 in the electoral count. Voter turnout was then at a historic 61.6%, a level so good that it won Democrats the White House, the House, and the Senate. Now you contrast that open primary in 2008 with the 2016 primary in which the Democratic Party cleared the field for Hillary Clinton. And that's not my opinion. The DNC itself acknowledged in 2016 that it unfairly favored Hillary Clinton. Thus, voter commitment was not secured the way it was in 2008. As the party establishment coalesced around Clinton, it left a lot of Democratic primary voters pissed off, upset that there was an unfair fight. And in that general, despite winning the popular vote by 3 million votes, Clinton lost the electoral count 227 to 332. Voter turnout dropped from 61.2% from 61.6% to 59.2%, a 2.4% drop. A drop that cost the Democratic Party not just the White House, but also the House and the Senate. Let me repeat that. A 2.4% drop in turnout was the difference between the Democratic Party winning the White House, the Senate, and the House, and losing the White House, the Senate, and the House. So now contrast that with 2020, when the Democratic Party held a robust 28-candidate primary. And I'll admit, Obama eventually tipped the scale in favor of Biden, cleared the field well into the primary, but that was well into the primary. And the size of the primary better pressure tested Biden and forced him to rise to the occasion to win. Biden won by 7 million votes, won the electoral count 306-232. And moreover, that primary helped provide critical data into selecting a VP candidate that would most strengthen the ticket, i.e. Kamala Harris. Voter turnout was at a historic 67%, a level that once again won Democrats the White House, the House, and the Senate. And now in 2024, because of Joe Biden, the Democratic Party did not or was unable to hold a primary. And the end result, Harris lost the popular vote by 4.5 million votes, lost the electoral count, 226 at 295 plus, and voter turnout dropped 2.5% down to 64.5%. Now think about this. History repeating itself. In 2016, a 2.4% drop in turnout was the difference between controlling the White House, House, and Senate and losing them. And now in 2024, a 2.5% drop in turnout has resulted in the Democrats losing the White House, the Senate, and grasping at straws to win control of the US House. To be clear, this doesn't absolve the very real misogyny and racism that Kamala Harris faced. But those two obstacles of misogyny and racism make holding a primary that much more important, because such primaries help build the critical and larger coalitions needed to overcome the obstacles of misogyny and racism. And this analysis is not second-guessing nominating Kamala Harris. After Biden finally dropped out, she was the most logical choice as the party's nominee. And if there was a robust primary, she probably would have been the nominee, but with the broader coalition of support she needed. So this is not a critique of her. It's a critique of the fact that an impossible job was thrown upon her. She was told, okay, now you're the nominee, pick a VP running mate with no voter input, speed date 330 million Americans, and define yourself as distinct from Joe Biden, all in 100 days or less. Look, Black women can do a lot of amazing things, but even Black women can only be at one place at one time. You need time, and she was not given that. It's revealing, I don't know if you guys know this, that on election day, one of the top Google searches was, did Joe Biden drop out? Y'all, that's not a question any voter should be asking on November 5th. And it's a question no voter would be asking if the Democratic nominee had more than a blink of an eye to make her case to the American people via a robust primary that Joe Biden denied. So in short, Joe Biden's decision to deny the American people and Democratic Party voters a primary is fatal. It's inexcusable. It's one of the main reasons the Democratic Party suffered a major loss in the 2024 election. And what upsets me the most is that we saw this coming. We knew this would happen. We know this is what happens when you don't give voters a chance to invest in the democratic process. It's just like any relationship, you guys. Think about a relationship with your loved one, with a coworker, with a neighbor. You can't just show up and expect people to trust you with a major critical decision when you haven't invested the time to do so. Think about your ride or die, the person that you would do anything for. Why are they your ride or die? It's not by accident. It's because you've been there for them. They've been there for you for years and years and years and years and years. Think about the dude at the office who only shows up when you want something. This is exactly what was imposed upon Kamala Harris by Joe Biden. If he had stuck to his promise back in 2019, 2020 and said, hey, all right, it's March of 2023 now, presidential elections 18 months away, I did what I promised to do. We had a successful midterm election as well. Our messaging is working. Let's stick to that messaging and let's have a robust primary. And I cannot wait to see what young, exciting new candidates we have running. We could have had Kamala Harris. We could have had Pete Buttigieg. We could have had J.B. Pritzker, Gavin Newsom. Gretchen Whitmer. There's so many young, powerful Democratic candidates that would have thrown their hat in the ring. There could have been some, another, unknown candidate like an Obama that could have come up. Who knows? But it was stifled. And the country is worse off for it. The party is worse off for it. Because when you don't have that investment on the presidential level, you don't have that down ballot investment as well. I ran for Congress this year. And in our primary, because there was no presidential primary and there's nobody exciting the base, we had the worst turnout since before World War II. Think about that. We had the worst Democratic turnout since before World War II. And so if you're wondering why 12 million people stayed home when they voted in 2020 instead of now, that's why. We didn't engage them in the primary. We didn't prime the pump. It's not rocket science. It's very clear. If you don't reach out to people, if you don't engage them in the democratic process, they're not going to show up for you. And that's what Joe Biden did. This is why I put this loss primarily at his feet. And it's sad that this is going to be his legacy, but this is a decision he made because he wasn't willing to uphold his promise. He wasn't willing to do what he said he was going to do and step down when it was time. And like I said, it's not like he was 60 years old and decided I'm going to go another term. I mean, my dude, you're 82. You're 8 years older than the average life expectancy for men in the United States. Go enjoy your life. You've done everything you needed to do. You served in the Senate 50 years. You were vice president. You were president. What more do you want? You've won the Presidential Medal of Freedom. You're going to have a library named after you. You're going to have highways named after you. What more do you want? That's how we got here. But that's not all. There's two more major reasons. And when we come back from break, I'm going to dive into them. One of them is Merrick Garland's failures. And the other one we'll talk about when we get back. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. If you're listening, hit that subscribe button so we can continue to do this advocacy. Don't go away. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. If you're listening, please do hit that subscribe button so we can continue this advocacy. I tell you, your support is what's making this possible. It goes a long way. And the best part about it is the fact that I've built trust. And that is really the most important currency that we have in this world, especially as we've been talking about the failure of legacy media. All right, we've been talking about what happened in the 2024 election, why Kamala Harris lost. And I talked at length, quite angrily, might I add, let me acknowledge that I put the primary blame at the feet of Joe Biden for not allowing there to be a robust primary. That was fatal and devastating. I share the data on that. But it wasn't just Joe Biden. Merrick Garland played his role as well. His failures are absolutely historic and epically reckless. In January of 2022, fellow Sirius XM, I think channel 127 host Dean Obeidullah wrote a powerful piece calling on Merrick Garland to finally charge Donald Trump for the January 6th insurrection. He said, quote, "It was sincerely heartening to hear Garland say the Justice Department remains committed to holding all January 6th perpetrators at any level accountable under the law, whether they were present that day or whether they were otherwise criminally responsible for the assault on our democracy. If Garland, however, ultimately chooses not to prosecute Trump for his attempted coup and his role in the January 6th terrorist attack, I believe historians will count it among the key mistakes that ultimately led to the end of the United States as a democratic republic." He wrote this in January of 2022, nearly 3 years ago. Dean's words they're prophetic. They are prophetic. Garland's cowardice in this critical moment in American history has now gone down as one of the key mistakes that could ultimately lead to the end of the United States as a democratic republic. The Democratic Party leadership agreed that Donald Trump was singularly responsible for the insurrection. Republican Party leadership and Mitch McConnell agreed. His exact words were, he is practically and morally responsible for the insurrection. Singularly responsible. Garland charged and convicted over 1,000 rioters who participated in the insurrection, but the one man most responsible for violence that day faced no accountability, no justice whatsoever. And now he will be the next president of the United States. And look, just as guilty in failing to hold Trump accountable is Joe Biden. When he saw that Garland would not fulfill his obligations of prosecuting a literal insurrectionist, Biden could have had Garland fired, could have fired him himself, and appointed a new AG. And the thing is, I get the point that we don't want presidents firing attorney generals because they don't do what they want them to do. But this is not a matter of Biden trying to do his personal bidding. The man committed an insurrection to stop the democratic process. It's modern-day Hitlerism. And Joe washed his hands of it. He could have used his bully pulpit to deride the apathy of Garland in the face of the most violent attack in our nation's capital in our nation's history. But like Garland, Biden did not act. That set the stage to normalize the January 6th attack as a peaceful protest, to absolve Trump of responsibility and accountability, and to enable him to run for and win the presidency once more, this time with Supreme Court immunity. Had Garland done his job, Trump would be behind bars for his crime right now of inciting insurrection. But Garland's failure and Biden's apathy, directly enabled what Dean Obeidallah warned of nearly 3 years ago, and now it's too late to act. It's too late. It's just too late to act. And three, and this is to me, I think, one thing that we need to fix going forward. We can't fix the first two. Biden's gone, Garland's gone. But this third one, the Democratic Party can't fix, if we choose to. It is this bizarre obsession with moving to the center and abandoning its own supporters. Look, after Biden finally withdrew, I wrote a detailed piece itemizing the three things that Kamala Harris must do to win the White House. They were expose the dangers of Project 2025, present an inspiring vision of economic, social, and climate justice, and stand firm against war crimes in Palestine. Unfortunately, the exit polling shows that with the exception of successfully tying Trump to Project 2025, the Democratic Party failed to land any kind of inspiring economic, social, or climate vision, and it failed to stand against the genocide in Palestine. And both of these were part of the collective Democratic Party collapse on election night. And yes, again, to acknowledge, racism and white supremacy absolutely helped Trump win. You might have read my detailed piece on the Nazi rally he held at Madison Square Garden. But the idea that it was singularly racism or xenophobia and not working class issues, it's simply not something the data supports. I'm sorry, but you can say it as much as you want, but Trump will end up receiving around the same number of votes in 2024 as he did in 2020. Meanwhile, Harris is receiving roughly 12 million fewer votes in 2024 than Biden did in 2020. No matter how racist Trump's base is, and it is pretty racist, that doesn't account for 12 million fewer votes for Harris. Those fewer votes are the combination of Harris not reaching the base, in part due to a short runway, thank you, Joe Biden. It's due to the Democratic Party not listening to the base, and it's due to the Democratic Party actively working opposite of what their base is telling them. And we saw all this coming. Let's talk about losing the youth vote. Way back on July 22nd, I wrote, Gen Z voters are drowning in student debt. They're unable to afford out-of-control home prices, and they are devastated by the climate crisis. Few demographics better understand the struggles of working Americans today than do Gen Z Americans, making it no surprise that they are turned off by the 2024 election. The 2020 election proved that when you inspire young voters, you win across the board. Thus, it behooves the Democratic Party to listen to our next generation of voters and leaders to ensure Democrats earn that vote this November and beyond. This is exactly why, after being promised a bridge presidency in 2020, Gen Z made no secret about supporting Biden and helping him win, and no secret about their disappointment in the lack of options for president in 2024. Given their massively growing influence, it was absurdly stupid to ignore Gen Z. Yet this is what Joe Biden enabled, even as polling showed the Democrats were losing the youth vote. Polling showed that. We knew it was coming, and Biden didn't care. And the 2024 post-election data affirms the catastrophic impact of Biden's decision to not drop out. The data shows that 18 to 29-year-olds, which comprise 16% of the electorate, 16%, shifted nearly 30 points to the right. Not just white people, not just white Gen Zers, across the board, nearly 30% to the right from 2020 to 2024. 30%. This shift happened due to a combination of Biden's refusal to step down when he promised to, and also aggressive Republican outreach to young voters via social media. The Democratic Party didn't make the same kind of investment. The Republican Party did. Republicans recognized that young voters trust social media more than regular media, and they invested heavily in social media via Daily Wire and Turning Point USA and Purdue University, leaving Democrats flat-footed. Democrats had no response. Since 2021, Republicans under the Biden administration lobbied social media companies to stop fact-checking election misinformation. Again, leaving Democrats flat-footed. It's like we learned nothing from Cambridge Analytica. And then when Trump saw how unpopular the TikTok ban was among Gen Z voters, he flipped the script and very quickly and loudly condemned Biden for trying to ban TikTok, making him own that. Again, losing the youth vote, Democrats stood flat-footed. Next, Democrats lost the economic argument. Despite the record high stock market, despite lower inflation and low unemployment, Democrats missed the key issues of economic indicators. Failing to capture the youth vote that catapulted them to victory in 2020 was a fatal mistake. But then they compounded that mistake by abandoning their economic populism that won them in 2020 as well. A Gallup poll in October found that the economy was the #1 issue for both Democrats and Republicans. And remarkably, voters gave Trump a 9% higher rating on the economy than they gave to Harris. And Harris touted her Nobel laureate endorsements, her newspaper endorsements, her economic plan, her tax credit, her small business credit, her first-time homebuyer credit. But none of that mattered because it didn't reach the voters the way it needed to reach. And why? Here's why. Data scientist and scholar Steven Semler points this out, that Biden and Harris all but abandoned the Build Back Better economic message after 2022. And he has this great chart that shows how often they talked about it and how they completely left it and began to talk about the stock market and their ironclad support for Israel. Semler writes that as 47 million Americans went hungry and 43 million lived below the poverty line, all Biden and Harris seemed to talk about was economic growth and their ironclad support of Israel. Semler goes on to point out in his detailed research article that poverty increased a shocking 67% under the Biden-Harris administration. And again, Harris planned and offered plans about child tax credit and business. That's fine. That's great. But plans for the future are not going to overcome the suffering people are facing in the present, especially when that suffering happens under your administration. 67%. We went from 25 million people living in poverty in 2021 to 43 million people living in poverty in 2023. On immigration, Democrats lost the argument. Immigration was a top 5 issue for voters of both parties. And Trump successfully kept a 9-point advantage over Harris. The Democratic Party's message to Latinos and to Americans in general didn't land. And so rather than slamming Latino voters for shifting right towards Trump, they should reflect on why the message wasn't heard. Because for Latinos, economics is a top message as well, and Democrats didn't reach them in an effective enough way. And so dismissing the shift as, well, Latinos are just racist now, it's a stupid shift. It's a stupid thing to attribute to the shift. Latinos didn't just become racist suddenly in 2020, from 2020 to 2024. Democrats failed to reach them in 2024, the way they reached them in 2020. And then finally, losing the Palestine argument. Despite the improved rhetoric from Harris on Palestine, when she was asked if there was any policy shifts from Biden, the answer was always a firm no. And this is significant because polling was clear that stopping arms Netanyahu would result in more votes for Harris. She could have broken away from Biden right in July and said, look, there is no contradiction between maintaining Israel's security and upholding American and international human rights law. She didn't do that. She chose not to. And Trump was able to commandeer the brand of being the peacetime president, even though it's a BS brand, but that's what people viewed him as. A YouGov and IMEU policy project poll among Democrats and independents in the swing states of Arizona, Georgia, and Pennsylvania found that in Arizona, she would have won 7-1 support if she called for stopping weapons to Israel. Meaning, for every 1 vote she lost, she would have gained 7. In Georgia, 8-1 ratio. In Pennsylvania, 5-1 ratio support. These are all states that she lost this time, by the way, that if she had won, she probably could have won the presidency. Had she called for an arms embargo, the polling tells us she would have had a 5-1, 7-1, and 8-1 voter increase in those states. Beyond single states, nationally, 61% of Americans want to stop weapons to Israel. 63% of moderates and Republicans. 77% of Democrats want to stop weapons to Israel. 77% of people under 30. 75% of Black Americans. 64% of Latino Americans. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. 56% of white college grads. That's your base. Look, American Muslims comprise 1% of the US population. The vote some American Muslims withheld, or the vote that some in the uncommitted movement withheld due to Biden's policy in Israel, did not impact the election results. As much as you want to claim it did not. Refusing to listen to the 77% of Democrats, 63% of moderates, and 61% of all Americans, that absolutely impacted election results. And then last but not least, as we close out the show, Democrats lurched to the center and lost. Look, Kamala Harris served as one of the most progressive senators in the US Senate. Biden tapped her as his VP pick to pull in the left bloc of the Democratic Party. And it worked. They won. But when it came time to run for president and distinguish herself from Biden, she just refused to do so. Despite the abysmal state of healthcare in the United States, and despite her past staunch advocacy for Medicare for all, Harris dropped it from a platform. A policy with more than 70% support, gone. Trump is out here saying, well, I got the concept of a plan. Harris could have said, not only do I have a concept of a plan, I have a plan. Guaranteed healthcare. It's going to save you money. It's going to save lives. She dropped it. That's alienating the left. The asylum ban of Trump that Biden and Harris loudly condemned in 2019 and 2020, they embraced in 2022 and 2023. And that pissed people off. That pissed off people on the left. Harris flipped on fracking, from going anti-fracking to pro-fracking. That pissed off the climate base and young voters. Each of these moves to the center were designed to pick up centrist and Republican votes. But instead, they alienated Gen Z and progressive and climate justice voters, the same voters that they got to win in 2020. And this Democratic Party obsession with recording Republican voters is just a failure. Biden did it in 2020 and got 6% registered Republicans. Harris in 2024 actively courted Republicans, promising to appoint a Republican to her cabinet, inviting former Republicans like Kinzinger and Cheney to speak at the DNC, proudly accepting the endorsement of Dick Cheney, a man credibly accused of war crimes. And as a result of all this bending over backwards for Republicans, a whopping 5% of Republicans flipped party lines and voted for her, while 4% of Democrats left and voted for Trump. That's a 1% net gain, while losing young people nearly 30% to Trump. That's wild. And while losing Latino men 18% and Latino women 7% to Trump. Harris was a successful senator and vice president by being a progressive. Early polling after Biden finally stepped down had her up 6 to 8 points because voters were excited at the prospect of a new and fresh voice. That was not Joe Biden. But sadly, rather than embrace that wave, she doubled down that she would not do anything different than Biden. She moved to the center. She took the endorsement of a war criminal. She refused to break from Biden. And so progressive voters that supported her in Biden in 2020 broke from her and they stayed home. That's fundamentally what happened. And that's a shame. Because compounded with a tiny runway, compounded with the failures of legacy media, it was just too much for her to overcome. In conclusion, the Harris campaign raised nearly $1 billion in just 3 months, compared to Trump's only $388 million over 10 months. Yet at the end of the day, Trump found ways to ensure his base came out and vote for him, and the Democratic Party found ways to ignore the critical voters that catapulted them to victory in 2020. Racism and misogyny and media failures, Russian interference, third-party candidates, they all played a role, yes. But at the end of the day, this was the Democratic Party's election to lose. And they must take responsibility if they hope to meaningfully reform their fatal flaws and win in 2026 or 2028 and beyond. Look, Donald Trump's a fascist, and Project 2025 will invite fascism to America. This is the reality that we face. Democratic Party must understand that it will never out-conservative or out-center Republicans. Republicans own that space. It's like trying to start a car company and say, I'm going to build a safer car than Volvo. It's not going to happen. That's their space. They own the safety space. The Republicans own the conservative space, the center space. They own it. That's what they've always done. And there are fewer of them than us, people on the left, but we can't win people on the left if the Democratic Party tries to go to the center and center right. The Democratic Party must stop cosplaying as a left party and actually become a left party that prioritizes economic, social, and climate justice with meaningful action, not meaningless rhetoric. Today, the Democratic Party, and I'll close with this, has two very distinct paths ahead of it. You can either blame everybody else as racist, embrace war criminals like Dick Cheney, and hold loaded primaries that deny voter input, thereby ensuring a repeat of this election's failures in the future. Or the Democratic Party can look inwardly and actually listen to its base and its future. Young voters, Black voters, Asian and Muslim voters, Latino voters. And by doing so, ensure success on the local, state, and federal level for a generation or more. This is what the Democratic Party leadership has before it. To me, it's an easy choice. And they've already jacked this up twice. For the love of God, don't jack it up again. Stop this nonsense and actually do some self-reflection and listen to your actual base for once. The fate of our country literally depends on it. Ugh. All right. That's my angry cry. Thank you all for tuning in. This is my privilege and pleasure to have your trust. Be sure to follow us on social media at Qasim Rashid across all platforms. Hit that subscribe button so we can continue this advocacy and continue speaking truth to power. We got a great show lined up for next week. Same time, same place at 10 a.m. on SiriusXM Sundays. For listening on Substack, make sure you hit that subscribe button. My friends, be fierce. Continue speaking truth to power and continue leading with justice. Until next week, peace.